Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today, and thanks for taking the time to participate in our Power to the Profession focus groups. The purpose of this webinar is to give you a little bit of background grounding before the focus groups take place in person. We know that the task force has generated a lot of material and has been very thorough, and while this is a great basis for discussion and policy going forward, it can definitely be overwhelming. My goal is to help you feel more comfortable with the decision cycles before we talk in person. So for a brief overview of today, I'm looking to bring Power to the Profession decision cycles to their essentials for you. The webinar is not intended to replace the documents, but rather as a supplement to them. First, I'm going to do a short introduction about myself. Then I'm going to start with the basics. What is Power to the Profession? What are its goals? Next, I'll explain what makes a profession and how that differs from what we have now. After that, we will talk about the already finalized decision cycles 1 and 2, which establish the professional identity of early childhood educator and the document upon which we will be basing the competencies of the profession. We'll move then to the current decision cycles, the draft of decision cycles 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 5, which simultaneously dealt with designations within the profession, where the competencies can be attained, the pathways and qualifications that will be supported, and the specializations within the profession. Finally, we will talk about what you can do to be a part of Power to the Profession within and beyond the focus groups. So to give you a little background on the voice you'll be hearing for the next 20 minutes or so, and also a person you'll be meeting in the focus groups. My name is Katie Albitz. I'm currently a consultant with NYAEYC, working on Power to the Profession and our Get Out the Vote efforts for the 2018 midterms. I'm also currently a member of our NYAEYC's Young Professionals Advisory Council, and that means I'm about one of about 15 young professionals across the country who helps guide NYAEYC's decision-making and membership engagement of young professionals. I also always like to add my experience in the field of early childhood education as context for my perspective on Power to the Profession. So I'm a former preschool aide, toddler teacher, and in-home childcare provider. So before we start talking about exactly what Power to the Profession is, here's some statistics NYAEYC provided that explain why the circumstances are what the circumstances are that brought about the need for Power to the Profession. 50% of early childhood educators are worried about their own family's economic well-being. Their compensation grew by only 1% between 1997 and 2013. They earn 40% less than workers with similar qualifications. The work of early childhood educators is valuable, complex, and chronically underfunded. It's time to change that. And that's where you can help Power to the Profession do just that. So what is Power to the Profession? Power to the Profession is an initiative designed to define the early childhood profession by establishing a unifying framework for career pathways, knowledge and competencies, qualifications, standards, and compensation. Research shows us that the importance of both early brain development and early investments in our nation's young children are critical. This important evidence is helping our nation gain a new understanding about the need to expand access to high-quality early childhood education for children from birth through age 8. Yet efforts to improve the quality of early childhood education that do not focus on the early childhood educators themselves have and will continue to fall short of their goals. Power to the Profession is an initiative taken by a task force of organizations such as NYAEYC, 0 to 3, the National Association for Family Child Care, the Council for Professional Recognition, and stakeholder organizations such as the National Black Child Development Institute, Save the Children, and the Military Child Education Coalition. These efforts are informed by and reflective of grassroots perspectives that aim to capture a full range of diversity of the early childhood workforce. That is why, as a deep dive state that was chosen to help at the grassroots level, New York is conducting focus groups across the state during the course of the decision cycles. Power to the Profession is guided by the following principles: that birth through age 8, particularly birth through age 3, is a critical development period that lays the foundation needed for lifelong learning. Most children under 5 years old receive care from someone other than a parent. Families need high quality and accessible early learning programs to seek and maintain employment. Well-prepared, effective, diverse, compensated, and supported early childhood educators are essential components of quality early learning programs for children. Increased public investment in the profession requires a clear answer to policymaker questions about earnings and career pathways. Therefore, early childhood educators must develop and advocate for a unifying framework of the early childhood education profession. So, what makes a profession? All professions have a common identity and framework. The early childhood education profession must be better defined in order to make a stronger and more coherent case for increased public investments. The profession needs these public investments to better serve young children and their families. So, as you can see, there's a list of 12 different requirements that a profession must have, including a name, a distinct role in society, distinct responsibilities, a code of ethics, all the way down through accreditation of professional preparation programs, government agencies that issue licenses, and government agencies that penalize licensed professionals who violate professional norms or threaten public safety. So as you look across this list, I'm sure you see some things that we already have now, but do you notice anything that we might be missing? That's what Power to the Profession is trying to establish. So what do we have right now? If you ask a random group of early childhood educators any of the following questions, you could get any number of answers. Who are we? Are we providers, childcare providers, teachers, childcare workers, daycare workers? What do we do? Are we doing early learning? Are we doing childcare? What ages do we serve? Do we just serve preschool, 0 to 5, or 0 to 8? And of course, we could work across any number of settings. So the goal of Power to the Profession is to unify our answers to these questions so that when we advocate for ourselves, we are all speaking the same language. So what have we established so far? So far, decision cycles 1 and 2 have been officially completed. These decision cycles were regarding professional identity of early childhood educators and the competency document they will follow. Who are early childhood educators? What do they do? How is this different from other professions and occupations that support young children and their families? The task force decided on the following answers to answer these questions about who we are. The name of a professional is the early childhood educator. The name of the profession is the early childhood education profession. Members of the early childhood education profession are prepared to be accountable to the following responsibilities: planning and implementing intentional, developmentally appropriate learning experiences that promote the social, emotional development, physical development and health, cognitive development, and general learning competencies of each child served. Establishing and maintaining a safe, caring, inclusive, and healthy learning environment. Observing, documenting, and assessing children's learning and development using guidelines and established by the profession. Developing reciprocal, culturally responsive relationships with families and communities, advocating for the needs of children and their families, advancing and advocating for an equitable, diverse, and effective early childhood education profession, and engaging in reflective practice and continuous learning. The early childhood education profession cares for and promotes the learning, development, and well-being of children birth through age 8 to establish a foundation for lifelong learning and development. This foundation for learning is built through reciprocal relationships between early childhood educators and the children they serve. Reciprocal relationships require attention to family and child diversity, including race, ethnicity, language, culture, social class, immigrant status, family structure, special needs, and learner characteristics, which is one of the multiple influences on the children's development and learning. So this graphic sort of breaks down the difference between what we view as the early childhood field and the early childhood education profession. So you can see if we start first with the field, home visitors, mental health consultants, policy or advocacy specialists, pediatricians, children's librarians, and more are part of the field. They're not part of the profession. You can also see that on the left side in the pink and purple that individuals not meeting professional qualifications do fall outside of the realm of the profession. These professional qualifications are, of course, being established through the course of Power to the Profession. Another facet of early childhood field that's not a part of the profession is business or operations administrators. But on the other hand, administrators who are pedagogical or instructional administrators are a part of the profession. And so as we close in on the profession at the top of the graphic, we see those pedagogical and instructional administrators, as well as early childhood educators themselves and higher education faculty. These three components are the early childhood education profession. So supporting the learning and development of young children requires complex, demanding, and valuable work that is performed by many individuals in many occupations. The early childhood education profession is a distinct profession among other professions and occupations in the field. So as far as general competencies are concerned, in Decision Cycle 2, it was decided that the task force identified the 2010 NYAEYC standards for initial and advanced early childhood professional preparation programs as those that reflected the required standards and competencies all early childhood educators need to know and be able to do. These standards best met the task force's criteria of preparation of professionals across settings, degree levels, and serving children birth through age 8. So right now, we're not going to touch on the details of that document because it is a draft that was just recently released, but a webinar should be released very shortly, which contains the details and explanation regarding that draft. So what is the current task? Decision cycles 3, 4, and 5 were considered simultaneously in their first draft and sought to answer the following questions. Should the early childhood education profession have specializations? When and why should individuals specialize? What preparation is required to become an effective early childhood educator? Where does this preparation occur? What are the differences between degree levels? How many professional designations or levels are there in early childhood education profession? What do these designations mean? So the first question they tackled was how should the designations within the profession be structured? They decided that there should be multiple designations within the early childhood education profession. Most professions have one designation or level. For example, certified nursing assistants, licensed practical nurses, and registered nurses are all identified by their credentials and are all considered to be 3 standalone professions operating with single designations who work together in the nursing field. The single designation structure offers clarity by establishing distinct and separate roles. However, the single designation in other professions has often resulted in stratified and highly segmented fields that, if applied to early education, would likely result in some of the exact ends that we are intentionally working to avoid. Having a single designation would, for example, be more likely to result in the exclusion of educators from communities of color and those without bachelor's degrees. The task force argues that the multiple designation structure is child-centered because positive relationships are at the core of quality and young children do not distinguish between the roles of the adults who interact with them in a classroom or home-based setting. This structure holds all early childhood educators, regardless of designation or role on team, accountable for supporting the child development and learning and meeting guidelines established by a unified early childhood profession. They also state that the multiple designation structure seeks to promote diversity and equity. The multiple designation structure intends to reduce segmentation of the concentration of ethnic and linguistic diversity among lower paid ranks of the profession that creates stratification across professional roles. They intend to do this by keeping the different roles together in the same professional structure, helping to ensure that all individuals in the team are equally valued, have a common identity, and are prepared to be effective in their specific practice. The multiple designation structure also intends to increase the advocacy voice of the profession because more people are part of the profession and they are unified together. It discourages separate designations for advocating at cross purposes and ensures that when the profession advances, all early childhood educators within the profession advance together. The multiple designation structure also provides an opportunity for clear and meaningful pathways that promote articulation across profession preparation programs and reduce the need for redundant preparation. It also supports professional growth and diversity that transcends stratification, as individuals will have opportunities and resources to advance within a specific designation or to another designation. So as you can see by the graphic on the right, the early childhood education profession is not currently labeled by role in a classroom or home-based setting. So it is not labeled by lead teacher, co-lead. aid, or any of those commonly used terms. Instead, it is ECE 1, 2, and 3. So what preparation programs should be endorsed and supported to prepare early childhood educators? These programs will be responsible for preparing early childhood educators caring for children birth through 3rd grade across settings, including for-profit and nonprofit childcare, family childcare homes, schools, Head Start, and military childcare. In particular, innovations are needed that are designed to reach non-traditional students to eliminate barriers that exist to higher education. So what preparation programs are going to be endorsed? First, the early childhood education professional training programs. And they are typically an award that requires the completion of a program of study that is less than a year to complete. Completers may meet the standards for industry recognized credentials such as the CDA. These programs are a minimum of 120 clock hours. Next is the Early Childhood Education Associate's Degree Program. These are usually about 2 to 4 years of full-time coursework. An associate's college coursework, that is. An associate's degree is at least 60 hours of college level coursework. 1 credit hour is equivalent to 37.5 clock hours. And bachelor's degree programs are typically 4 to 5 full-time years of college work. A bachelor's degree is at least 120 credit hours, and a master's degree program, the only master's degree program that is listed in Power to the Profession currently, is an initial preparation program. So that means that the person trying to complete the program already has a bachelor's degree in a non-related field, but they're pursuing an initial master's degree. This should take about 1 to 2 full-time academic years. Currently in Power to the Profession, there is no designation for those who have achieved a master's degree beyond a bachelor's degree in early childhood education, or advanced degrees beyond that, such as EdD or PhD. In implementing a unifying framework, the task force states that they will honor the existing early childhood workforce by creating exemption policies, pathways, and timeframes that serve as a bridge from the present to the future. They will not advocate for increased educational requirements without advocating for funding to provide requisite supports and attendant compensation. They will not advocate for new regulations without advocating for funding to implement them. And they will not advocate for policies that disproportionately and negatively impact educators from communities of color. And they will advocate for policies that mitigate unintended consequences and create meaningful pathways for advancement. So what does this look like? The chart here first shows the similarities in professional roles. As you can see, ECE 1 is a professional training program, such as CDA. ECE 2 is an associate's, and ECE 3 is a bachelor's or initial master's degree program. So what are the similarities? The relationships with young children, the relationships with families, advocacy roles for the profession, young children, and families, professional standards of practice, and legal standards of practice are all the same across roles. And now the differences. As you can see, ECE 1, the professional training program level, contributes to developing and sustaining physically and emotionally healthy early childhood educational environments. And they also contribute to developing and implementing strategies and meaningful opportunities to engaging families, other professionals, and communities to support children's learning and development. However, ECE 2 and 3 are able to develop and sustain physically and emotionally healthy early childhood educational environments and develop and implement strategies meaningful opportunities to engage families, other professionals, and communities to support children's learning and development. Here's where things start to differ between ECE 2 and 3. As you can see, where we're going to find these differences is predominantly that ECE 2 will be able to do the selecting, collecting, and using in birth through pre-K settings. So for younger children, ECE 2s will have more responsibility than they will for older children. So ECE 1 and 2 for birth through pre-K levels and ECE 1 for birth through third grade settings support the collection and use of assessment data to inform practice and support young children and their families. And ECE 2 at the kindergarten through third grade level and ECE 3 at all levels selects, collects, and uses assessment data to inform and practice and support young children and their families in birth through third grade settings. Might have said that backwards, I apologize. The ECE 2 is able to do that in birth through pre-K settings. Now we see the same thing here. ECE 2 in kindergarten through third grade settings has the same role as ECE 1 in all settings. That is to support the development and implementation of developmentally, culturally, and linguistically appropriate curriculum in birth through third grade settings or birth through pre-K settings for ECE 2. And ECE 2 in the birth through pre-K setting and ECE 3 in all settings develop and implements developmentally, culturally, and linguistically appropriate curriculum. Now, this is where you'll see differences across settings. So an ECE 1 must always have the appropriate guidance of an ECE 2 or 3. And as far as how that can be applied in home-based early childhood education programs, they're suggesting that innovative supervisory models such as cohort-based models should be used. And all levels should have access to ongoing instructional support and professional development. As you can see in ECE 2, if you're in a kindergarten through third grade setting, ECE 2 will need appropriate guidance of ECE 3. And the same innovative supervisory models may need to be used in home-based settings. And as far as ECE 3 goes, they have access to ongoing instructional support and professional development, the same as all the others, but they do not need supervision directly from another early childhood educator. So now we move on to specializations. The task force recommended that early childhood educators should generalize before they are able to specialize. So at this point, Power to the Profession is going to focus on creating the unifying framework for the early childhood educator generalist. Based on the revised competencies, they state that every generalist should have the skills and knowledge he or she needs to respond to any child and or to recognize when there is a need to seek out appropriate additional expertise and specialized knowledge. So possible examples for the future may include infant toddler, pre-K through third grade, dual language learner, early childhood education, special education, administrative and business leadership, and specialization in educational approaches, such as Montessori or Reggio Emilia. So where do you come in? Lost my paper for that, so we'll just do it off the top of my head. As far as focus groups are concerned, there's a list at the very end of the draft of cycles 3, 4, and 5. Scroll all the way through the first 42 or so pages to the end, and you'll see the questions that we'll be talking through with you in the focus groups. Here are a couple that I wanted to highlight. What are your thoughts about a profession with 3 designations? How can we ensure that individuals earning the ECE 1 designation in particular are respected and valued as members of the profession and not limited to clerical tasks or basic caregiving routines? The difference between preparation and practice between those who earn associate's, bachelor's, and graduate degrees may primarily focus on the ability to make independent decisions about the implementation of curriculum and assessment in kindergarten through third grade settings. What are your thoughts about these distinctions? And finally, how do we ensure that all individuals, particularly individuals representing diverse populations, can successfully complete and seamlessly advance through these programs? So last, thank you. Maybe you've been involved since the beginning of Power to the Profession, or maybe this is your first time learning about it. But either way, your voice and your unique experience is essential to the process. If you're attending a focus group, I would really appreciate if you could review the study guide at the end of the document for decision cycles 3, 4, and 5. You can find that in our initial email invitation. And if you don't have it, you can always reach out to me at kalbitz@NYAEYC.org. You can sign up for the newsletter at naec.org/newsletter-signup. And you should definitely do that and check the box for Power to the Profession if you're not getting emails about that already. And finally, join us for an additional webinar on the revised draft of professional standards and competencies for early childhood educators coming very soon, possibly to your inbox almost immediately after this one. I'm looking forward to meeting you all in the coming days. Thank you so much and see you soon.